Hey kids, I'm back. It's like I never fucking leave, right? I started a little series a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, that was the Micro Brushless World series. And the first one was an introduction, and the second one was props and motors. And honestly, I was holding off on doing the flight controllers and ESCs version, which is this episode, and because I'm expecting a bunch of them in the mail, honestly, because I've got the build that I'm doing with my brother Nick in Serbia. That's going to be an awesome build. It's getting an F4, and I think I've got a couple other F3s in the mail coming in, and I just got tired of fucking waiting. So, bam, here we go. I'm going to go over the pros and cons of certain things, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of good models, standalone models to show you, okay? But I will do my best. So, when you're looking at a micro brushless build, what I would do, this is just me, just my advice, shit has gotten so much cheaper now that it's almost, in my opinion, almost laughable not to buy a flight controller that has OSD. OSD on a real bird is almost absolutely essential. On a micro, I can kind of take it or leave it. It doesn't bother me if I don't have it, but I at least have to have a low voltage alarm because you just have to have it. But realistically, and I'm going to put, since I don't have a lot of good models to like physically show you, I mean, I do in the birds themselves, and I'll show you a couple that I do have laying around, but, and I'm going to put in the description some links to the ones that I have used and I personally recommend. And when you can go out and buy an Omnibus F4 Micro FC with OSD, with the UARTs, everything that's a 2020 mount for 19 bucks, I don't even think they're that much. Get it. Don't, and I know a lot of my friends on the channel use Pico blocks and I know that's a real popular one too, and I honestly don't know shit about it. So this video isn't dissing the ones I don't talk about. Well, yeah, I will be dissing a couple, but just my overview. There's two. Let's get on with it. There's two sizes that you want to deal with micro brushes: a 16 millimeter by 16 millimeter and a 20 by 20. 16 by 16. It's kind of hard finding good frames, in my opinion. I've never done them. I have never built a 16 by 16. But the 20 by 20s, that's what I use by standard. That's 20 mil by 20 mil. If you take a real flight controller, like here's an Omnibus F3. If you take a look at this, and this is very important when you're ordering to pay attention to this. This is a real full-sized board. Good old-fashioned Omnibus. That is a 36, or 35 really. 35 by 35, all the way around, okay? And then you take one of these. This is a micro. This is what this is for our build coming up. And this is a Omnibus F4 micro, okay? And that little piggy should be a 2020. Now we're talking about the mounting holes. So you're looking, it's hard to do. You get the gist. It's 20 by 20. And this is a 30 by 30, which is your standard, if I remember right, your standard size. Yeah, give or take. So yeah, that's what you're looking at. I only build 2020s. I don't fuck around with the 16s. It's just, it's too much. Yeah, so first recommendation when we're talking flight controllers is go with OSD. I'm telling you right now, kids, just don't even fuck around with it. That's all there is to it. There's others like, for instance, the one that came in, this is all that's left of it, the King Kong GT95 or 95 GT, whatever it was without a doubt in the worst flight controller I've ever seen in my life. You guys have heard me rant about this before. And it's just a bag of ass. You couldn't put a beeper on it, and it had no OSD. And I looked at a couple reviews of this thing, and these guys are giving it rave reviews, and they must be people that have never flown a quad before, because here's my thinking. If you can't, and the flight controller's missing, I threw it away. If you have no beeper, and you have no OSD, how the fuck do you know when your batteries go low? How do you know when to land? Huh? You know, who fucking thought that up? Really? I mean, whoever thought that shit up threw his Legos away because they didn't come with a bottle of glue. He couldn't figure out how to put them together. Bam! I'm telling you. So, if it were me, I mean, sure, you can get a little tiny fucking flight controller that, you know, might be $10 that has no OSD on it. Don't get it. Spend the extra bucks, kids. I'm telling you right now. Bam. The other thing you want to look at with flight controllers, this is my personal preference, always get one with a real micro USB port on it. None of those, I don't think I've got a, well, they look like this. One of those little connectors. Don't get that. That's just one more connector you have to keep track of. They actually make little tiny flight controllers that have this type of connector on them, and you actually have, it's an adapter cable that goes into USB. Really? I know some of the tiny whoop shit, which I never got into tiny whoops. Never had one, don't want one. Too small. But anyway, yeah, look, make sure you've got a real micro USB. One less thing to fuck around with. The other thing you want to look at with a flight controller for a micro is the voltage input capacity. What I mean by that is I've ordered some stuff that's coming, and I'm going to do a build video on it for a 1S brushless. Bam. Which is foreign territory for me, okay? I've built 1S brushed birds. I built a lot of those. I got a bucket full of those things. So I'm used to that, but I'm not used to the brushless versions of it. And that little brushless comes with a little 6 amp ESC and a little tiny little flight controller. It's real cute, but the input voltage will only handle 1S. You put a 2S on that thing, poof, out comes the genie. So that's something you really want to look at. If your guys are building a micro, and have in mind what batteries you're planning on using. You're planning on using a 2S, you're planning on using a 3S. Example, here's a 2S, obviously. So this one better, if that's what you're using, have that voltage input. Because what happens, you want to, I don't know if I can even see it on here, your battery input on this one, so you can detect your, it's right here, actually, so you can detect your voltage. Your battery juice is going straight into that pig. So if you guys are going to run 3 or 4S, the build that Nick and I are going to do is going to be 3 to 4S. And I made sure that this controller, that's what this is for, can handle a 4S input. That's something to really make sure of. A flight controller is a flight controller, guys. I mean, if you're used to big birds, you know, 210s, 220s, whatever, it's the same principle. What do you want? Do you want OSD? Do you want an F4 processor, F3? The, you know, F4, you're going to be able to run 8.8 on the PID loop and the gyro and all that stuff, and you're still only going to have a 5% CPU usage. Or a cheapo F3, like an SP Racing F3, which is one of my least favorite controllers, you're going to run a 4.4. Or the decent F3, like an Omnibus F3 with a new Betaflight 3.2, is going to run really well with an 8.4. It used to run with Betaflight 3.1.7. It ran great with an 8.8, but it's actually better to run with an 8.4 now. But that's a whole other video. So it's kind of like a big bird. Think about what you want. I'm perfectly fine with an F3. No problem whatsoever. But if you can get an F4, what the fuck, you know? It's like, you want a gallon of booze or you want a quart of booze? It's the same type of thing. Hang on. But that's one of the biggest things. For me, it's OSD and how much your input voltage is. Bam. Perfect. If it's an F3, if it's an F4, my personal preference, I don't really give a shit, especially for a micro. And that's really about it. And the other thing to think about, and I saved this little piece of shit too, to show you the example. Sometimes you might want a built-in power distribution board. This is out of an Emax Baby Hawk. Okay, and a big old wad of shit on the top there. Whatever. But you can see here, where's my trusty pointer, that you've got, you probably can't see it through the hot glue, negative, positive, and signal, negative, positive, and signal. This is like an all-in-one FC, okay? But that's because the Emax Crappy Hawk came with bullet ESCs. In case you guys don't know, A 4-in-1 ESC is a board. Bam. Okay? And your motor wires all go to it, and it's one solid piece. Bullet ESCs look like these, right? Individual ESCs, just for you new guys that aren't used to it. So if you have bullet ESCs, you have to have power outputs for all 4 of those. Kinda. Now, that's very, very rare. And I, as your friend, am going to advise you never, ever, 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 ever build a micro brushless with bullet ESCs. Bag of ass, waste of fucking time. It's like that chick you dated and you look back and you're like, oh, fuck, what was I thinking? I'm telling you, we all have one of those chicks in our life, and that's what bullet ESCs are on a micro brushless. Case in point, if you just watched the video I just uploaded, when I merged a Emax Baby Hawk into an King Kong 95 GT and put it in a pod racing frame, bam, this is what you get. Watch that video, it's really cool. But I have these little tiny fucking bullet ESCs out of that Baby Hawk. They're 6 amp, complete waste of fucking time. This is a 2S bird. It flies like a dog on fire and it's great, but oh my God, what a pain in the ass. Because think about it. You've got two power wires coming off of each ESC and a signal coming off of each ESC. Yeah, pain in the butt. I did this one magically. I actually wired all the power, positive and negatives, with 2 wires and 4 signal wires, and that's it. But still, complete pain in the ass, extra weight. The only benefit to bullets is the fact that if one blows, you can replace one. But really, a 10 amp ESC costs you 12 bucks. Who cares, right? So that's my thoughts on there. So finding a flight controller, a micro flight controller that has a built-in power distribution board, pretty much a complete waste of fucking time. Every single board I have used, and I'll tell you the ones I use. I do have an SP Racing F3. What one is it in? I think it's actually in this. Yes, I think this is one. There's no OSD on it, which was okay because I don't have OSD on this camera because I was too lazy to hack it. You can hack these cameras right in that far left pin. Cut that pin, wire out of it, you can get your OSD, but I couldn't be bothered with that. This is the only SP Racing F3 that I have. This board right in here. And I know you can't see that, but that's okay. And we're just going to talk about them. And this is a piss poor design on my part. I built this from scratch, and my USB port's right there. So if I ever have to hook it to the computer, I have to take this Stanton out, but that's okay. No big deal. So I do have an SP Racing F3, and let me think before I speak. Yeah, all other 9 or 8 or however many micros I have are all running F3s or F4 omnibus because that's just what I fly. And that's why I flew my big birds too until the Kakute and the DYS F4 Pro came out. And now I'm kind of merging over to the all-in-ones for that, but that's a whole other video as well. So I run omnibus F3 and F4, bam, bar none, in all my micros. So if you take this muddy ass fly egg, look at that. That shit look like a Jeep Wrangler, man. That's awesome. This one here might be an F3, might be an F4. I honestly couldn't tell you by looking at it. It's just too late in the day. This fly egg, same principle. I believe that is an F4 if I remember right. Okay. And this one, if you look at the interconnection, and that's another thing you need to look at too. This one here, and that's my gist on flight controllers. In all honesty, buy an Omnibus F3, an Omnibus F4, what the fuck ever. Don't spend a ton of money because you can get a decent board for 17 bucks, 20 bucks. Just make sure it has OSD, a real micro port. At pretty much every flight controller you're gonna get is gonna have multiple 5-volt DC outs, okay? And that's important because you need at least 2. To make life easy, you need 5-volt out for your receiver and 5-volt out for your VTX or your camera. Bam, okay? But almost all of them have that. And even if they only have 1, you can still splice the wires together and stick it out that way. That's fine too. But let's talk about ESCs and combinations. With ESCs, this one is a mating pair. I've run a few of these now. HGLRC F425. This little bitch is a powerhouse. There's a 25 amp ESC in this pig. Look at that shit. That 25 amp. in this tiny little board. Bam! That's awesome. And they interconnect. If you look at, see that little arrow right there? That's the forward direction. And if you look at the flight controller, there's an arrow for forward direction. And those two interconnect with these, what we call DINs, which digital input pins, right there. Click them together, bam, done. That's it. Those pins right there are your board voltage for running, okay? And your inputs, or your outputs, depending which way you're going, for your motor signals. That thing's fucking done, son. That's easy shit. But it's also 59 bucks. Not the cheapest way to go. Or maybe 53. I don't know, but it's 50 bucks. But I'm running this exact setup in this build here that I made. This one's running 1104. What are these pigs? 6500 kV with a 25 amp ESC with an F4 omnibus with OSD. And this thing right here, you can stick it, you could probably put a 4S on this, but you can definitely put a 3S on it all day long with those props, and that thing will just rip your ass apart. Fucking badass, right? That is the exact same rig that this is. That's why I bought this. I thought, well, I already know this thing works really well, and the build that we're going to do here, which is going to be a video so you guys can see it, is going to be a 3 to 4S build, and this is going to be bam, badass. That is a nice kit if you've got the money. It's kind of expensive for a micro, but I love them. So that's one way that your flight controller and your ESC interconnect, meaning they've got those DINs or digital input pins that link together. Another way, if you can see this here, now this was not a matched, well, yeah, I guess this one was. F4 flight controller, what is this? I want to say this is a 15 amp ESC. Don't quote me on that. And I know those look like bare wires, but they are protected. They have conformal cone on them. My wires got a little tight there. This was a hodgepodge. But anyway, I've got this multi-coax or multi-cable, rainbow wire cable going from the flight controller to the ESC. That's a very common way of doing it as well. And most ESCs will even have solder points for your pins, okay? So that's another way of doing it. Let's see, I'm trying to think what else I can show you that might be a little bit different. Here's a Toad build. I can't remember what the hell I put in this. This is a terrible solder job. I had some burn up there, but this one's actually an Omnibus F3 with a 10 amp, if I remember right, ESC, but it's all the same principle. Real USB. One of the things you do want to take into consideration when you're doing your build, if you have the real micro USB, make it where it's accessible. Like I showed you guys on this build, which is this is my favorite bird, my favorite micro. I cannot get to my micro USB port. And I did this for a reason, and for the life of me, I can't fucking remember why I did it. But even if that's the forward direction of the board, it's still better to have this USB pointing out the back. That way you can just plug it into your computer that way. You don't have to fuck around with taking this out. This one I did right, this one I did not. You can change the orientation in Betaflight of the board. You do not have to put it in forward direction. I don't know why I did this, but I did. Whatever. This is just, fucking badass. So, take that into account when you're building your micro. Can you access your micro USB? That's very, very, very important to do. Here's another one. This is like an AR Fun 90, but there's also another name for this. It's an awesome, I can't remember the frame, but anyway, this isn't a frame video. This one also is running an Omnibus F3, if I remember right. Ooh, charger's done, goggle battery's done, and this is a 15 amp ESC. Now this ESC I put in so the terminals were front and back, which is a little bit different, okay? And this one is actually yeah, I think it's got a port too, right there, port plug, okay? So that's usually how these things get put together. Real quick, and I don't want to drag this out too long because this is not a very fucking exciting video. I've done like 3 videos today, so I'm kind of pooped out with the video thing, but just trying to catch up from last week. General rule of thumb, we talked about this with motors. With your ESCs, if you've got the money, go big or go home. I'm telling you right now, Don't go out buying little fucking 6 amp crappy Hawks. These bullet, fucking nasty little things. The only reason I use these is because I had them. Because I took apart my crappy Hawk, or my Emax baby Hawk that everybody thinks is great. And trust me, kids, bag of ass. But anyhow, go big. Seriously, the cost difference, if you can get a 25 or at least a 15 amp, get it. Okay? A 10 amp, a 15 amp, a 25 amp is not the same as a big bird, because a big bird, like a 210, 220, 200 millimeter quadcopter, those motors and those huge props are drawing a shit ton more power on those same 25 amps that these are giving out, and these are not pulling nearly as much. So what I'm getting at, you stick a 25 amp ESC in this bird with these, and you put a 4S on there, you ain't even touching the capacity of this ESC. You may blow the fucking motors up, possible, but, and I've done it, trust me, but you're not even gonna touch that ESC with a 4S because it's 25 amp. Think about it. If you're running, like, take this Hellbender here. This is a 30 amp all-in-one ESC in here, and I'm running these monster truck Air 40 T motors on this thing. Those things are putting out a fuck ton more current than, and that's still 30 amps. This is 25, let's just assume. These are putting out a shit ton more for that same 25 amps that this guy's holding. This 25 amp ESC, the burst ratio might be different, but we don't really care about that with these. Theoretically, you can take this you can take this literal setup right here and put it in this bird and it will fly, believe it or not. But think about it. It's kind of like having a car with an engine that'll go 25 miles an hour, or a car with an engine that'll go 100 miles an hour. Let's say you drive both those cars at 25 miles an hour. The one with the smaller engine that's built to go 25 is going to poop out much quicker than the one that's built to go 100, but you're only driving 25 because the duty cycle and this, that, whatever. So if you can, I try not to build a micro under 15 amps on the ESC. It's a misconception. People think, well, if I put a 25 amp ESC on a 2S micro, it's going to blow up the motors. No, it's not. Motors pull power. ESCs do not push power. Does that make sense? So if your motor is asking for 10 amps out of a 15 amp ESC, you're going to get 10 amps. If your motor is pulling down 15 amps, it's going to give you 15 amps. If you have a 100 amp ESC with a 10 amp motor, it's still only going to be putting out 10 amps. Bam! Remember that. So that's kind of money in the bank. If you buy a 10 amp ESC, but you're running motors, say 1105s with 4-bladed props, and you're running that full 10 amp all the fucking time, that thing's going to wear out much faster from a heat standpoint, duty cycle standpoint, than if it were a 25 amp. Money in the bank, I'm telling you. Spend the extra money if you can, because they don't weigh anymore. A 15 amp ESC does not weigh any more than a 10 amp, and if it does, it's so minute you can't even tell. So that is my advice for ESCs on those. Here's an example of a proprietary. This is a King Kong 10 amp ESC. Look at the size of that bitch. Really? Okay, somebody did not graduate from short bus school, because this motherfucker right here is a 25 amp ESC. This is a 10. Do the math. Bam. Okay? Yeah, that ain't no good. So, that's that. Trying to think if there's anything else I can talk about with these. Always match up. If you're getting a 20 millimeter mount ESC, get a 20 millimeter mount FC. It's the same principle. Micro quads are a little bit more forgiving than big birds because, like, for instance, this guy here, this flight controller is not even bolted down. And if you watch the build video I did on this, which is, you know, extrapolating the Emax Baby Hawk guts and the King Kong 95 GT, because I had no space left because these stupid ass ESCs, I actually had to do a special trick to mount this board. And it's in there firm, but it's actually soft mounted, but it works really, really well. But what I'm getting at is with micro brushless, they're pretty forgiving. You can actually double-sided tape the fucking flight controller and the ESC in the frame and usually be okay. They're not quite as sensitive, as a Big Bird. It's just a fact. And I just saw this screw is loose. It's bugging me. There we go. Sorry. Okay. Whatever. So I think that's really about it. Use your head a little bit. If it were me, really kids, OSD, real micro USB port, period, on your flight controller, an F3 or F4. If it does not have, and that goes for Big Birds too. With the technology, I mean, back when I started in quads, you had to buy, like, say, a NAS 32 board, which is an F1 processor, and there was no OSD back then. So you had to get what was called a minim OSD, which is a little circuit board about this big, got hot as a fucking Pop-Tart, and you had to wire that in, wire this in, and do all this shit, and then you had to use an FTDI adapter to program the OSD. Ugh, pain in the ass. There's no excuse, in my opinion, for building a bird without OSD in today's day and age. I think, don't quote me on this, I am ignorant to the PicoBlocks, but I don't think the PicoBlocks processor has OSD, and I know the SP Racing F3s don't. Get a fucking omnibus. Seriously? I mean, it's easy. And as for ESC, bigger is better, I'm telling you. And that goes for Big Birds too. I usually only run a 30 amp ESC on my Big Birds. I just do. And I've never had a problem. But I know a lot of cats that run 45s, whatever. So that's my advice for the micros. This has gone on long enough. If you have any questions, please ask me. I've built a zillion of these things. And I will put the flight controllers that I use for micros in the description down below. So please feel free to look at those and let me know if you have any questions. So until next time, have a good one, kids. Keep your shine side up. Take care.